If you work in information security or IT, or you're just an executive working in an organization and you know about disinformation, misinformation, some of the real problems that come from that. Today I've got an expert, someone that I'm very excited to talk to. I hope you'll stick around. We're going to ask him about his company and technology approaches to dealing with this very difficult problem. So stick around. I think you'll enjoy the discussion today. Hi, this is Ed Amoroso from TAG. I want to welcome you to our discussion. I've got a really interesting guest today, my friend Wasim Khaled, who is the head of a company called BlackbirdAI that works in a really important area. We're going to learn a little bit about how you deal with misinformation, disinformation, and they've coined a new phrase that I've been prone to use recently called narrative attack. I'm going to ask him about that. But Wasim, thanks for making some time today. It's awesome to see you.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Really appreciate it.
Let's start with just a real brief summary of what you do at BlackbirdAI, and then I want to get into some of the tech and some of the threat and pick your brain on things that I think have become pretty top of mind. So tell us about the company.
Sure. So Blackbird AI protects global 2,000 companies and national security organizations from something we call narrative attacks that are created by misinformation and disinformation. We'll talk a little bit more about what constitutes a narrative attack in a moment, but really it's what you hear about every day on social media, the news, the dark web, these things that occur that can cause significant financial, reputational, and societal harm that are information-driven risk, essentially. So we started the company back in 2017. We're quite mission-driven, and our first customer was, in fact, the Department of Defense. And the platform that we've built, the Constellation platform, it's an AI platform, and it's designed to help customers and partners gain insight into narrative attacks and be better prepared for when they happen so that they can make better strategic decisions and avoid the worst impact that could be possible if it was unmonitored, for example.
Wasim, if I was talking to my mom, she would understand that if I said 2 + 2 = 5, that's wrong. That's factually incorrect. But with misinformation, disinformation, where do you sort of root or anchor things to get a sense of what you would define? Because in a minute, I'm going to ask you about narrative attacks, but I want to get a sense of what we're measuring misinformation against.
Yeah. So, my team has been working on this problem and solutions for going on 7 years. And in the early days, especially, and sometimes even today, the defining a lot of these things and quantitatively trying to define them becomes almost like a philosophical conversation around truth, right? And in some cases, it's productive, and in other cases, it's not. So the first thing to establish is that, first just getting some terms out of the way. So disinformation is something that is created with the intentional and deliberate objective of deceiving someone, right? So it's fabricated information. Misinformation is the unintentional spread of that disinformation. So that could be someone just clicking share without verifying.
So disinformation would mean me swearing you and I didn't speak today.
Yeah.
And then someone just spreading that out is basically, that's misinformation?
Yeah, misinformation might be, any number of things, frankly, but it could be taking something that maybe is the truth. It could be recontextualizing it in a different way, and then 1,000 people share that. So, the disingenuous kind of recontextualization of something that happened, for example, would be an act of disinformation. It's a deliberate, objective of deceiving someone. Misinformation is the unintentional sharing of that. And I would say that even with those two distinctions, narrative attacks and the way in which you can quantify the way in people are trying to manipulate people using information in kind of the open web is a bit of a different discipline. And disinformation and misinformation become traits of a narrative attack, but it's not the whole thing. It's not just truth versus falsehoods, but it's about that manipulation and that trying to drive behavior using narratives. And I'd love to talk a little bit about a narrative attack, because that's really what we've landed on as a benchmark to understand the type of harm that might
It sounds like a new category to me. Like me, I've written a bunch of textbooks on cybersecurity, and we all started with the old CIA model, like if there's secrets or somebody degrades operation or blocks you from doing something. We always thought canonically those were the three things. Then we noticed fraud was a problem. Seemed like that didn't fit. And now I honestly think you guys have hit on, or at least you've summarized, an attack that does seem like something new. I like the idea of narrative attack. I think it very accurately captures a problem. But help the people watching. They may have never heard the phrase. What is it that what are you including in the concept of a narrative attack?
Sure. And before I even go down that path, if you think about disinformation, misinformation, and that entire kind of manipulation of perception as a cyber attack almost on
Yeah.
public perception and human perception, it kind of helps frame it from perspective of, with cyber attacks came cyber intelligence. And so with narrative attacks, you're essentially requiring narrative intelligence. You need to quantify the narrative attack. So the narrative attack, as we define it, is any kind of assertion that shapes perception about a person, a place, or a thing in the information ecosystem that can cause harm. And when I say a thing could be a policy, it could be an ingredient in a kind of supply chain scenario, but it's taking that entity, could start with a single post
Mm,
online, and then quickly scale out of control. And it's a tradecraft that is occurring. It's a new type of attack that can come out of nowhere and blindside any organization or any person. And these could be using things like bot networks. There could be foreign malign influence actors involved, but it's about drawing attention to this topic of interest, but using it as an almost lightning rod to create harm towards a particular entity. I spoke on stage at a large cybersecurity event recently, and one chief information security officer actually said to the entire audience that this is a new threat vector that they don't
yeah.
have visibility into. So, you mentioned here that this is something new, and I believe particularly for the cyber security community, it's something that is not only an intelligence gap today, but it's very important now to understand the narrative, and particularly with the new SEC regulatory framework that has you reporting breaches in 4 days, or there's materiality issues. You have to understand the public narrative on how you even handled a breach and things of that nature. So I think it's more important than ever that cyber security officials and leaders in particular really pay attention to the narrative, because it can impact their own teams and of course their larger company in very meaningful ways.
It's funny. I've thought a lot about this, and you and I spent some time recently, and but can hardly think of anything since. It's like such an interesting topic. But one thing that strikes me is that a narrative attack could be either something completely fabricated. I say, hey, Wasim went on this crazy rampage in the local square, and you didn't. That could be nonsense. But it could be that you did, or that something like maybe you had a issue in your family that's true, but I'm spreading it as a narrative attack. It seems so interesting that it's possible that the narrative might be true. Just I'm spreading it intentionally to cause harm. I think that fits your definition. So it's not always just like spreading lies. It's different. That's why I love the narrative phrase, because I think that captures it. There a lot of times it could be something that has an element of truth to it, but just never intended for spreading across social media. We all know what that's like. Am I characterizing that right? I think there's a lot of depth to this.
You're absolutely right, and in fact, the threat actors that are good at this, right, that are really good at utilizing narrative attacks, are opportunistic with truth, right?
Yeah.
Something that actually happened, because it's much more effective. Because if you're to dig into it, you're gonna actually end up with something that did occur in reality, right? So I'll give you an example though, and something that may not be obvious to a lot of people thinking about the problem. So let's just say from the perspective of a post that someone in, let's say it's a consumer packaged goods company, so consumer products, and you have an individual who goes out to social media and posts that they believe the product has harmed them in some way,
Yeah.
right? Maybe they're having like a skin discoloration or something like that, and they post a picture there. Now, let's say that organization is, perhaps said something recently that aligns them with one type of ideology or another. Let's say that they're doing things that maybe some groups out there, activists, might think are environmentally unsound. Doesn't matter. It could be anything,
Yeah.
particularly
Yeah.
for these very large companies with large footprints that have just pissed somebody off, right? Or a group off. Now, um, the vector here is instead of creating disinformation, they can go and find that anecdotal incident and they can make sure that while it might have been a tree that fell in the forest and no one heard it, they make sure it's heard, right? And they can
Mm.
also recontextualize that by taking that original thing that happened that someone put out there and then creating all kinds of other, conflating it with other things that are happening in the world, and then making sure that whether it's a group of bot networks or some sort of a sock puppet farm where you have one person operating like 10,000 accounts and creating all this frenetic commenting and amplifying it in such a way that enough people see it that it starts to really cause damage. Now, we have direct experience with a company that went through something exactly like this, and it was a $2 billion a year product line within a much larger portfolio, and they lost almost 20% of their revenue on this exact attack, that started from a single post but was amplified so effectively that most of the people you would poll actually thought that that health issue was occurring in their audience base. So that's one example. Then, another very large one is a beverage manufacturer was the victim of a narrative attack, and that led to almost 20 some $billion in shareholder value erosion in a matter of days, and they still have not reestablished that back. And it started as a marketing decision they made that got turned into a narrative attack. It was very, precise and surgical in the messages that it was driving in the information space, and it truly did them significant, perhaps perpetual damage.
Right.
Right?
I think we all know what you're talking about. I drink their beer, so I do know the one. Now, with you guys, how do you help, like a business? How would they find out? Are you like doing a dashboard, or like what is it that if I'm watching right now and I'm thinking, whoa, this is something my board, my senior leadership, my whole company should be concerned with. Like, what do you do? How do you find these and let an executive team see what the problems might be so that they can take action?
Yeah. So it is a dashboard. It's an AI powered dashboard. And, you know, it's very important that you get ahead of this problem or detect these types of things as quickly as possible. Before we talk about the actual dashboard, one of the things that a lot of organizations kind of think about is because this is open web, because it's social, they
Yeah.
think about like social listening tools, which is a legacy approach to understanding this kind of chatter, right? And so usually in an organization, somewhere in the comms department or the marketing department, there are some of these tools deployed. And so people think, oh, we probably have that covered. Maybe it's a marketing thing, but no, they don't, right?
Flipping kind of service sort of thing, right?
Yeah, it's like listening. These products were built for marketing. It's a very poor proxy for harm and for narrative attacks. It's just not high fidelity enough to understand what's really happening and what kind of risk it might pose to organizations. So we know directly, security, risk, and communication leaders typically come to us because their current tools fall very short. And much of what they currently do, even with those tools, is kind of slow manual work, reading around single mentions or posts. They don't see
Googling
the
their name,
narrative.
like
Yeah.
Google your name. That's pretty common.
Right. And so like even with these tools, they don't see the narratives kind of spreading in real time and how much they are snowballing. And this is what really needs to be looked at. And so within the dashboard, we look at hundreds of different signals, and it all boils down to, where are my fires today? What are the narratives that are going to cause me the most harm today, and how do I understand what's actually happening? Are there bot networks? Which hyper agenda driven groups are actually involved in activating this particular narrative? And how do you rapidly get that to teams so that they can understand it very easily? So our AI based narrative intelligence platform really enables you to know which narratives impact our organization the most, what is the influence behind them, what are the networks that they touch, what are the anomalous behaviors that scales them, and which hyper agenda driven groups are connected to one another that also you could use for opportunistic approaches that can help heal the issue in the space and drive strategic decisions with real quantifiable data that can be visualized and distilled.
It sounds like really just a next generation approach to intelligence and social and things like that. It really sounds like a 2.0 from where most people, maybe it's a 3.0 from where most people are right now. So I hope companies are doing something. Tell us a little bit about some of your products. You guys have made some product announcements recently. What can you share with us today?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So while our core kind of flagship product that we've had in market for a while is the Constellation platform that I've been talking about, um, and that is a dashboard focused product, we recently announced something that we think is just one of the most groundbreaking things that we've ever launched, and very aligned with something we wanted to do since day one. That product is called Compass by Blackbird. And, really, you think about this tool, which today is it's browser based, but it's like a context layer for the internet. And while it's in web app form, it could be integrated into any application. I'll tell you a little bit about what it does. So what it does is it helps organizations and analyst teams navigate the kind of like information overload people feel that is caused by all of these different narratives and disinformation. The difference is it's a generative AI product. And instead of a dashboard, you just talk to it and it tells you what you need to know. Something we've envisioned since 2017, and the recent explosion of generative AI technologies uh, drove us to something that we built ourselves. So we have a risk large language model based on all of the things we've done over the years. You can put in any kind of claim or question. You can just type it in, or you can put in a link from social media. You can put in a link to a news article, videos, images, memes, and our large language model will go out into the live open web and get instant context and clarity around that topic in a summarized form with sources and links. Now, it's an early release, but we are enabling people to get in now. We also have a wait list, but it's blackbirdcompass.com. And you should check it out yourself. Your team should check it out. The feedback would be great, but really it's incredibly helpful to gain clarity through the noise. That's most of the feedback we've been getting around it. Automated fact checking, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but it just makes it easier for you to understand the information overload so you don't tune out, so you have a better sense of what's really happening.
I mean, the algorithm question any CS major would ask you is how are you sidestepping sort of the landmines of disinformation on the back end of your own analysis? Like, how do you know that this is right and that's wrong and this is right? Because some might actually be leading astray. I know you're seeking the evidence that that's there, but I'm just curious how you guys deal with sources of truth versus not, and what you present. That must be at least algorithmically somewhat challenging.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to think about this and quantitatively also build around it. So, first, the reason we look at the problem as a narrative attack is it actually doesn't need to, nor does it over focus on what is truth
Yeah.
versus falsehoods, right? Because it is such a gray area space where ideology and changing science, changing world can negate something that was accurate at one point and not later on. A lot of people call that misinformation, but that's how, frankly, scientific method has been for hundreds of years, right? Things change. So it's not great to stamp disinformation on things at a particular point in time. What is good is to try to do, okay, there are actors trying to manipulate how this narrative is being seen, which indicates intent, right? And it indicates that whether it's financial, political, ideological, someone tried to make this narrative move and proliferate in a way it wouldn't have otherwise, right? Or there's things like toxic language or known foreign state actors, and things of that nature, right? Those are the types of risk signals we look at versus a hard yes or no to whether it's truth or not. And then when it comes to something like Compass, it gets even further abstracted from trying to really differentiate between true versus false. It tries to give you all of the sources so you get a balanced place. A lot of people say, hey, we did our own research. This accelerates that ability for you to do your own research in a summarized fashion so that you can be you can get that context without having to do the work yourself. And while we move from a dashboard world to a generative AI and AI-driven agent world where the agents are out there doing work for you, we think that's the direction in which a lot of this is heading, which means I don't have the time to go and fact check or try to understand every single thing that I see. I can send this agent out, in this case, Compass, to go and fetch that information back for me, organize it for me, let me be better at critical thinking by almost creating a co-pilot for critical thinking. That's the way to think about that tool. It will not say this is real, this is not, this is false, this is truth, but it gives you the ability to make a decision yourself much quicker than you would on your own.
I hope that people listening will take you up on your offer. Why don't you repeat again the action here? If people are interested and say, oh my God, I love this. What should they visit your website? Is that the best? I know it's Blackbird AI, but is it Blackbird.AI? Is that the website?
Yes, Blackbird.ai is our primary website, and there'll be a link on there to Compass by Blackbird. If you go and you sign up for something on a waiting list, and particularly, if it's coming through this channel, we can always fast track those
There you
wait
go.
lists.
Mention tag, and you get pushed to the front of the line. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I tell you, Wasim, I talked to you for 4 hours about this. It's such a fascinating topic. I want to congratulate you on a wonderful company. I think you guys have an amazing future. This is, to me, probably the most challenging but also interesting aspect of cybersecurity right now. Spending an inordinate amount of time on it because I love it. But keep up the good work. You're keeping us nice and safe. And congratulations to your whole team. And thanks for making time today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just leave you with one thing, and for anyone in your audience who's really thinking about like this new type of risk, I would I would really ask them, how do you today know what the most harmful narratives are that impact the company that they're trying to protect? Do they understand the contagion effect of the narrative? Do they understand if there's bots driving that narrative? Do they know which hyper agenda driven threat actors are behind it, quantitatively down to the user, and which narratives are the most dangerous to them? And so, if the answer to one or more of those are that we don't really know, I got to say you have to have visibility into all of these elements as they're happening, because narrative attacks, I believe strongly, and many of the CISOs I've spoken to also believe this, that it's a new threat vector, and it can really damage an organization. And understanding this space can become a completely new role in protecting organizations. And it's something new that you can bring to the table to your leadership team saying, I, as a security leader, have found this new problem and we need to fix it before this happens to us. And there's many different companies they can point at to show just what can happen if you don't understand these types of risks. So I would just kind of also leave that in people's minds, and we're here to help.
It's an excellent action statement, Wasim. So thank you again for sharing, and best of luck and best wishes to your team over at Blackbird AI. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks so much, Ed. Appreciate it.
And for everyone else watching, we'll see you next time.